Okay, welcome back to TandemFlow's AI development course. We're here on lesson 5. Sorry for the change in the setup here. We had some technical difficulties, but we're going to get into lesson 5 here. It's going to build on the first 4 lessons. We are going to be talking about architect mode in Aider for this lesson, so make sure you're feeling super comfortable with everything we've covered in the first couple lessons. And once you're feeling good about that, you can jump into this lesson. So first thing we need to do is, as always, git clone our GitHub repo. Things might look a little different for you, but I have gone ahead and cloned our repository into VS Code. So I have that all set up. And one more thing we're going to need for this lesson is Ollama. So you can head over to the Ollama website. Ollama is just a nice program for running large language models locally on your computer. You don't need a crazy computer for these. Whatever you have will work for the purposes of this lesson. So keep that in mind, but go ahead, download Ollama, get things set up. There's great instructions here on the Ollama site as well as on Aider for how to get this set up and working with Aider. Once you have that good to go, and we can start checking out this new prompts directory that is new for lesson 5 here, and talk a little bit about what is going on with these new larger prompts that we will be using with architect mode in Aider. So architect mode is essentially this tool within Aider that allows you to have 2 LLMs working in tandem to develop software and build out prompts that you give them. Basically, there will be sort of an architect model, and this is a model that you want to be very strong and very capable. And then there will be an editor model. So the architect model will plan out the changes that need to be made and then pass this along to the editor model, which will actually go in and edit all of the code. It's a very high-level overview of what architect mode does. That's all you need to understand about it for this specific lesson and this specific course. Given the fact that there are now 2 LLMs working together, we can get more advanced with how we are prompting these models and the amount of code that we can produce with them. Prompting, I want to specify here, prompting is not a hard science. There is a lot of nuance to it. There's a lot of trial and error. And so it's not something that you need to really perfect. Right here, I have this template prompt set up that I'll walk through. And this is sort of how I format my prompts that I pass off to architect mode. But if you feel you have a better system, that's totally fine. Again, not a hard science. What really is important is just communicating exactly what you want done to the LLMs. Let's walk through this template architect prompt that I have set up. Essentially, what I've done here is just broken down whatever I'm having architect mode and Aider do into various levels of goals and tasks. So we have the high-level goals here, and this is just sort of like a 1-sentence description of what you are wanting the architect model to build. And once you have that defined, it's good to break that down into a few different mid-level goals. So these are just components that go into making that high-level goal successful. These are just smaller, more precise, more descriptive prompts, tasks for the high-level goals to be met. So high-level goal, like I said, single sentence describing what you want to make. Mid-level goal breaks down that high-level goal a little bit further. And then we have our implementation guidelines. So implementation guidelines are similar to the developer guide, which you can see we have over here. That is something we did in previous lessons. So the implementation guidelines take a lot of what the developer guide already does. I think it's handy here to have a lot of this stuff done twice. And this is also a place where you can input any other implementation guidelines for this prompt specifically. So if you're working on a new feature that you want to have a little bit of a different implementation than your developer guide or a very precise implementation, this is where you're going to go ahead and define all of that. So moving past the implementation guidelines, we have the project context. So the project context is super important for Aider because this is where you define what files it's going to have access to at the beginning of the prompt, as well as at the end of the prompt. So if there's files that you need created to implement the feature, this is where you will list out those files, as well as any files that Aider is going to need to edit. And again, this is just a list of file paths, and this will become more clear as I walk through the architect prompt that we're actually going to be running here in this instance of Aider. Finally, we have the low-level goals. So like I said, the point of these prompts is to break down a high-level goal into mid-level goals and then breaking those down even further into low-level goals. So these are essentially how exactly you want the code to be written for the feature you are adding or for the prompt that you are providing Aider. These can be literal code blocks if you have a specific function that you want to implement or something like that, or it can just be pseudocode, but you want to think on the lowest level possible here. So what is actually going to be written into the functions that you're writing, the files that you're making, etc. So, here I have 3. You can have as many as you'd like. You can go, you could have 20 of these if you'd like. You can go really big with these architect prompts. So we're going to be doing a simple example here just to make sure everything is working. But like I said, feel free to break the task down into as much detail as possible. Prompting, like I said, is not an exact science. So the more detail you give Aider, the better the response is going to be. And that's a general principle for all LLM development, all coding tools. The more specific you are, the better the response will be. Great. So let's break down the actual feature that we're going to be adding with this prompt. So here in the prompts file or folder, we have the front-end architect prompt. And what we're going to do is create a front end to our simple Wikipedia application and also use Ollama, which you installed at the beginning of this video, to have an LLM summarize a Wikipedia article. So this is going to be something that we actually use, something that is practical and we can take real insights from. Here in the front-end architect prompt file, we can see I have the high-level goals as the same format as the template I just showed. We have create a Flask web application that allows users to fetch, display, and summarize Wikipedia articles using Ollama for summarization. So this is a very broad overview of what we're trying to accomplish with this specific prompt. And you can see I've broken it down into mid-level goals. So implement a Flask web server with routing and templates. So Flask, if you're unaware, is a wonderful tool built or that uses Python to build very simple front-end applications. Super handy. We're going to be using Flask to set up a web server and then build some simple HTML and JavaScript around that. But Aider is going to be doing all the heavy lifting for that. If you're curious about more what Flask does, I recommend going to look into it. For right now, just know that it's how we're going to build the front end from our Python code. The mid-level goals, we have create a form for Wikipedia article name entry. So this will be on the front end where we can type in the article that we want to fetch from Wikipedia. We'll have the article fetching and display functionality, and we'll have Ollama for article summarization. And then beneath all of that, we have the summary display interface. So this is just going to be a place on the front end where our summary will actually be displayed to us. Here for the implementation guidelines, I've specified which dependencies are going to be used. So Flask, obviously, the Wikipedia API, Ollama, and this tool called Bootstrap. So all of these are just tools that Aider is going to use. And this just makes it a little bit more specific about how exactly we're looking for this code to be implemented. If you left Aider up to its own devices, it might not come up with the same list of dependencies given the same prompt. So specifying exactly what tools you want to use is super important. And that's a great place or a great thing to put into the implementation guidelines here. I also am reiterating the coding standards. These are present in our developer guide. However, I think it's important just to reiterate these because it will be writing a ton of code. The context window can get quite large, can get quite full. So just reminding it that these are the coding standards we're looking for will help with the end result. And we have some technical requirements, which is just, again, things that Aider should assume are working or should be wary of when implementing the actual code. So Ollama instance must be running. I'll show you how to do that. Async handling for API calls is here just for allowing our code to run and fetch API calls without having to restart every time. And then some basic error handling for failed article fetches. Again, this can be whatever you want. You can go into way more detail here about what exactly you're looking for in the implementation guidelines. For right now, I just have a pretty basic template that will get us a consistent result. So this can be as much detail or as little detail as you'd like. Here in the project context section, we have the beginning files. So these are all the files that Aider will have access to at the beginning. So we have our developer guide, the Wikipedia fetcher.py file, which we've been building up, and the article analysis.py file. So the main driver files of the project so far. And we have our ending files. So you can see here, Aider is going to be making several new files in this prompt. And this is just a way of us specifying what exactly we're looking for in terms of those new files. So I have a little list here, a couple different HTML files that we're going to build, and then some CSS that we're going to use for styling. Very basic stuff. You'll see how simple these files are. But for right now, just know that I'm specifying which new files are going to be in the project context. And I should go down here and add developer guide just because that won't be removed from our project context. So make sure that this is consistent with the ending files. And finally, we have the low-level goals. So here in the low-level goals, I've actually set up Python code for what I'm looking for and some HTML code. So very quick, 6 or 7 line code snippets that just prime Aider to do exactly what we're looking for. So these can be as detailed, as verbose as you'd like. Here I just have, 3 or 4, or I guess 5 low-level prompts here. And these are all, like I said, just code snippets. We'll see all of these be put into effect. You can see here I'm specifying which file this code should be going into. So for example, this is all HTML code up here, but now I'm specifying that I want this in app.py, which is a new file we'll be making. And this is all Python code. So these low-level tasks are sort of incremental steps that all build on top of each other. So you can have multiple files, multiple code types in each low-level task if you would like, which is the way I'm doing it. Like I said, these will all be implemented so we can run through this code afterwards and make sure that everything matches. But for right now, just know that I am just breaking down what exactly I'm looking for into individual steps. So I'm actually going to change this to be the 8 billion parameter model for a little bit better summaries. And I'm just reading through this one more time before we send it off to make sure that everything is looking good. Okay, once you are feeling comfortable with the architect prompt that you have built, or you have read through the one that I have set up, we can go ahead and boot up Aider with architect mode enabled. So I'll show you how to do that right now. For this specific lesson, I'm going to be using OpenAI's O1 preview for my architect model and Claude 3.5 Sonnet for my editor model. This is a very, very strong combination, one of the strongest out there right now. I'd recommend, depending on when you're watching this, to go check out Aider's leaderboard page, and that'll give you a better description of what models are performing the best right now, because there's constantly new models coming out, as you know. So it's important to be using the best tools you have. Right now, the time of filming this, I've chosen O1 preview and Sonnet, like I said. So I can enter in that Aider command, specify that I want to use O1 preview as my main model, and then we'll add this new flag here, which will be editor model, and this will be Sonnet. So if you haven't already, make sure you have your API keys set up, and we can run that. Here we can see the main model is O1 preview, and the editor model is Claude 3.5 Sonnet. So perfect. I'll go ahead and clear up my terminal and make this a little bit larger. And now what I can do here is just copy and paste this entire prompt. So I've copied all of the lines in this file, everything, and this is just going to be our entire prompt. So instead of just sending off 2 or 3 line prompts, this is almost 180 lines of code or of text that we're going to be sending to Aider. And Aider's going to do a great job of making sure this all happens. So to actually use the architect mode, we can use the /architect command, and I can just paste in this prompt. So here we can see Aider cut us off a little bit, but this is the entire file. Like I said, I've just copy and pasted it, and it's looking good to me. We specified that we're using architect mode, with that architect command. And what I'm going to do now is just send this off to Aider. It's going to ask me if I want to add all of these files to the chat, of course. And as this is running, it'll take a little bit of time. It's moving pretty quickly here. We'll walk through all of this code, but something I do want to touch on is the model selection for the architect mode is super important. Reasoning models are sort of the new best tool for the job when it comes to developing with LLMs. And so I would recommend using a reasoning model at the very least for your architect model. And then you can use a less advanced, more traditional LLM for your editor model. Sonnet isn't a reasoning model. So the reason I do this is just because the reasoning models are much better at breaking down large, complex tasks like this into simple, more straightforward instructions for the editor model. We can see here the first step in our architect has run, and basically what this is doing is just setting up the plan for the editor model. So this is all a one preview that did all of this planning. You can see here it goes through and it builds on the code that we gave it. And this is basically just setting up all of the code that we're going to need for actually implementing this feature. So it's writing a ton of code here. It's not actually editing any files. That's what the editor model is for. But this is just setting up a nice clear path for what exactly we want done from the editor model. So feel free to read through this. I trust this prompt. I trust O1 Preview to handle this instruction set. Like I said, you can have prompts that are 1,000 lines long or multiple hundred lines long. And if you are specific enough with those prompts, architect mode will do fine. So I've used architect mode quite a bit, so I'm comfortable with all of the code that it's written here. I won't walk through every single step, but just know that it has gone through and basically written all of the code that we need. It just hasn't implemented that. It even has the project architecture here, which is perfect, and gives us some instructions for running it. So it's going to ask us if we want to edit the files. I will go ahead and say yes. Something else I want to point out is architect mode does cost quite a bit more with API credits. So you can see here, obviously I'm using O1 Preview, which is one of the more expensive models available right now. But this was a 20-cent message. So just be cautious using these models because these API credits can add up quick if you're spending all day developing. So just be wary of that. Okay, this is looking great. It's gone ahead here, started writing out the search and replace blocks that we're going to need for all of our different files. Just doing a quick scan of all of this, and things are looking good. Beautiful. Has all of that HTML code for the site, which is perfect. That's CSS. Okay, so it's asking us if we want to make those new files. We'll go ahead and do that. So there's quite a few. There we go. We hit a linting error, no problem. It's going to go ahead and make that fix. And there we go. So that was super quick, but what just happened was we have this new app.py file, which is using Flask as we specified in the front end prompt. And we have all of these new HTML files for the actual website, as well as a CSS file just for styling. Super basic CSS code and very basic HTML files. We didn't get too fancy with this. This is sort of the most basic front end you can build. But the point of this is more that this would be very difficult to do without architect mode, because giving a single editor model this large of a prompt, it's very likely that it's going to miss things unless it is a very intelligent model. And especially as you build larger prompts for architect mode, having two models working together is literally going to double the accuracy and output of these models. So let's go ahead and give this a try. So I can use the /run command here. I'll clear out my terminal. /run Python 3 app.py. So this is this new file that I created that is setting up our Flask server. So we can run that. Looks like we have an import error here. So not a big deal. I can just go ahead and ask Aider to fix this. And this looks like a problem with the Ollama package. So Aider might just not have the most up-to-date information here. Totally fine. An easy fix. We'll see what it comes up with here. I'm using O1 Preview to make this fix, which is definitely overkill for this little error that we run into, but it's doing fine. I would recommend being more careful than I am, because, that was a 2 or 3 line fix that just cost me 13 cents. So just be careful, like I said. We'll add that file to the chat and edit the files. Perfect. Let's try that again. Okay, so our server has started up, and you can see here, this is the port that it's running on. So you can just use command click to open this up. And here we go. We have this nice article analyzer. Yours might look a little different depending on how Aider went about approaching this problem, but let's just try this out. So I will use the Seattle article, fetch that article. There we go. This is perfect. So we got the full article from Wikipedia, and it's nice and scrollable, which is perfect. We can do this analyze article, and it looks like we get some analysis results, all the statistics that we had from the previous projects, and then as well as this summary seems to have run into an error, but our code handled it very nicely, so that's good. Let's go ahead and try to fix this Ollama package problem that we're facing. So I should have Ollama installed, but maybe I just have to get it running. So we just double check. Yep. Okay, let's try this again. All right, so we've run into this problem here with our summary generation not working. Not a big deal. I'm just going to copy and paste this over into Aider, and I'm actually going to use the /ask command right here, just so right now I don't have anything. Let me read only that developer guide, and I will use that /ask command, paste in the error, say, just describe the problem. I do know from prior experience that there is some problems with how Aider and Ollama work together. So Ollama isn't, or Aider's, I guess, the LLMs that Aider is using are not up to date with Ollama. So what you can do is I'm just going to go over to Ollama and just look up Python SDK, because I know there is this blog post on this that shows you how to install a simple Ollama instance. So I don't even have to read through this too much. I can just copy and paste this over and put it into the chat. It's going to see that as a URL, scrape that. We'll talk more about what exactly is going on with this process here in future lessons. But for right now, let's just throw that in here and see if it can't come up with a better solution. Okay, we'll try to run our app.py file once again. Oh, whoops, I forgot Python there. So, and it's booting up. Try this again. Fetch that article, get that article, analyze it. Okay, so it's using the wrong model here. No big deal. I actually specified this in the front-end article prompt, which model I would like to use. So what I can do instead of describing this whole problem back to Aider is I'll close out of our app, clear out the terminal, and right here, I can just copy and paste this code, and I'll just copy and paste the model into here. So, and just give it a simple instructions to update the model to use DeepSeek instead of Llama 2 like it was using by default. So I already have this installed. If you don't have DeepSeek, you can use whatever model you want here. I'm just using DeepSeek for the purposes of this tutorial. It's asked me if I want to pull it. I don't, because I already have it. But now we'll try that again, run the app, and see if it won't work this time. Okay, so something is happening because this analyze article is taking a little bit of time. So ideally, what's going on here is Ollama is now processing this article. It's quite long, so it might take a little while, but I will return when Ollama has finished up its summary of this article content. Okay, so I ran into a couple problems there. I basically just had to continue prompting Aider with the errors that I was getting, and it was able to figure things out after I gave it access to more up-to-date information on Ollama. So might have to do a little bit of research. I just went to the Ollama blog post, like I mentioned earlier, copy and pasted this link, and then put that into Aider, and it was able to fix the problems pretty quickly here. So all that said, not much has changed. It's just the async specification from the front-end architect prompt wasn't carried into the actual implementation. Not a big deal. Super minor fix. Be ready when you are running these larger architect prompts to be making fixes like this, just because Aider can skip over things occasionally, depending especially on what model you're using. So again, use the best tools for the job. But now we can see down here, I have the app.py file running. Head over into the browser, and we can try this again. So I'll do Seattle again, fetches, perfect. I am gonna press analyze now, And I want to preface before this actually presents its summary to us that I'm using DeepSeek R1 1.5 billion parameter model. So it's a very tiny model that has a bunch of thinking tokens. So I'm doing this just for the sake of speed, basically. So it's going to give me kind of a nonsense answer. So just beware of that. If you use a higher quality model with Ollama, you're going to get a better response. There's a whole bunch to dig into with the quality of model and the best model to use. We won't be touching on that right in this lesson, but just know that this is a direct response from Ollama running locally on my machine. It built this nice little summary for us. You can see we have these thinking tokens up here. This is just a quirk of R1. So the actual summary starts down here, and it's fine. It's a very small model. So like I said, just doing this for speed. A higher quality model will do a lot better here. But point is, this works, and this works very well after just a few fixes, a few tweaks after that architect prompt. So most of the heavy lifting was done by the architect prompt in developing this whole front end. So this is amazing. This is exactly what we were hoping for. And before we wrap this lesson up, there are a couple things that I want to touch on just when it comes to using architect prompts and architect mode in general. And that is, like I said, to be careful that every code or all the code that you are asking it to write actually fits your standards. Something I like to do when I'm working on real projects, production quality code, is I will sit down and write out these architect prompts by hand on a piece of paper. I would recommend you start doing that as well, at least just for the first couple, just so you have a good sense of exactly what is needed. So I will write these out on paper and then take a picture, put it in ChatGPT, convert it to Markdown, whatever works, and then build my prompt from there. This is just a way for you to be sure that you know what's happening. You're not just blindly firing off large scale changes into your code base with Aider without knowing exactly the changes that are going to be made. So just be careful running these large prompts. Another side effect of these architect prompts is that Aider can sort of, if you're not specific enough with the implementation guidelines and the low-level goals, Aider will take your project and go in a direction that you might not be anticipating, or might not be expecting. So it's very important that you are as specific as possible, just because you, again, always want to be in the driver's seat of your development process. You don't want Aider to be completely taking over your project and you lose a grasp of what is actually being worked on. So be careful with that. One other thing is context management. So you can see here, we have several files here, 8 or 9 files that we're editing and working on. And that is a lot for Aider to juggle. That just takes a lot of context. I wouldn't recommend going too far with this until you feel very comfortable and confident in your prompting abilities. So this is about as many files as I would provide an architect prompt like this. If I can think of better goals and more specific low-level goals, I might take this a little further, but where the technology is at right now, 5 to 10-ish files seems like where these models start getting confused and making errors. So just keep that in mind. Things are getting better very quickly, exponentially better. So this is going to change, and these prompts will be able to double, triple in size very quickly. But it's important that you understand the fundamentals of how to properly communicate what you want done to your code base, to Aider, first and foremost. Before you start getting carried away with 20, 30 file changes, it's important you understand the basics. So work through these prompts, try this out on your own. If you run into problems like I did, again, check out that SDK blog post that I mentioned, as well as trying to just troubleshoot with Aider. I would recommend not going in and fixing the code by yourself, just because I think getting used to working with Aider is most important right now. And this is a very low consequence, perfect environment for doing so. So when you are writing those production level code bases, you're going to feel comfortable with your ability in writing these prompts. Okay, so that is going to be it for lesson 5. Hopefully this all is making sense. You're starting to see how powerful these tools can be. Architect mode is possibly one of Aider's most powerful features. Of course, this is lesson 5 of an 8 lesson course. So we're going to be building on this. We're going to be taking the concepts of multiple LLMs working together and really taking that to the next level in future lessons. So take your time with this, really digest this lesson, read through architect mode documentation on Aider, get familiar with everything before moving into the next lessons, because it's important you have a very good grasp on everything here before we take it to the next level. Appreciate you watching. We will see you in lesson 6.